Welcome to episode 8. Today we're talking all about the data. When we introduced AI and the definition of AI in episode 1, we introduced it as machines pursuing goals. And we said that the goal is defined by two things: an objective function, which we've talked a bit about, and its training data, which we haven't talked as much about. So today's focus is going to be around data. And let's start with some case studies. First up is iTutor Group. iTutor Group was doing a lot of hiring, but they were doing even more time sifting through resumes that were completely irrelevant or even bots. And so what they decided to do was to develop an AI system that could just auto-reject resumes that they didn't think would make it through the hiring process. They wanted a model that could just choose the best resumes for iTutor Group's specific hiring needs. However, the EEOC alleged that iTutor Group deliberately trained its AI recruitment software to reject candidates above a certain age. And iTutor Group ended up settling and having to pay $365,000 because of this. So what happened? Well, iTutor Group never explicitly told its AI model that it should reject candidates above a certain age. That was never in the objective function at all. It just told the model to choose the best resumes. The issue is with the training data, that the best resumes in the training data had younger candidates. And so the model is just learning patterns in the data, and it learned the pattern to reject candidates above a certain age, even if they were perfectly qualified in other aspects. Similarly, Amazon also a few years ago wanted to develop a recruiting tool, and they wanted to use AI to sift through resumes and find the best resumes. And Amazon had a very large data set, which was their own employees' resumes. And that made a lot of sense, right? If you're already an employee at Amazon, likely you would be a good fit. And so your resume would be a good fit for a job at Amazon. So it seemed like it was a great fit. However, it was soon announced that Amazon was ditching their AI recruitment tool because it was biased against women. And so AI research scientists actually uncovered biases against women in their recruiting machine learning engine because they were using all of these resumes from current employees, most of whom were male. And so this AI system wasn't explicitly told to reject or discriminate against women in the hiring process. What it was told was to choose the resumes that were most alike with the resumes that were already in existence in the Amazon database. And most of those were male resumes. So this tool started discriminating against women in subtle ways, right? In the resume, it would discriminate against women's names or names of women colleges or women's organizations. So what did these AI fails have in common? They had problematic data. So they had problematic data that enabled this goal to be manipulated and discriminatory. And we've talked a little bit about black box models, and we're going to talk more about black box models, and we have a whole sequence on black box models, but there's this lack of AI understandability. And because we don't know what's going on inside of a lot of these AI models, it makes it really hard for us to identify biases in our data. This is a really interesting and fun application. I highly recommend that you check it out. You can go to the QR code here, and I'll have a link in the description. But this is gender bias in the word-to-vec embedding model. Now, the word-to-vec embedding model is not used frequently in modern day tasks, but it's still used for many more simple natural language processing or text-based tasks. And so the gender bias word-to-vec embedding model, and we're going to talk a lot about embedding models in an upcoming video, but these embedding models have encoded different biases just because they utilize language in their data set that is from people. And so human biases have been encoded into the word-to-vec embedding model. And this application allows us to visualize that. So for example, this application shows that taco is unbiased. So taco, the word, is unbiased. Chocolate has a strong female bias, and chips have a moderate male bias. If we look at some other words, words like manager have a moderate male bias, boss has a strong male bias, engineer has a strong male bias, nurse has a strong female bias. Now, oftentimes, the ladies that I tell this to are pretty bummed out, but I also want to say that arrogant has a strong male bias, fun has a slight female bias, and asshole has a strong male bias. Now, it doesn't have to be demographic related to be biased. When you're building an AI model, oftentimes we think about these demographics as being, what we consider to be important when thinking about biases. But biases can come up in any data. Take, for example, if you're just predicting between cats and dogs, and you find that a lot of the times when the model predicts dog and it's actually a cat, it turns out that it's tabby cats. And so your model is biased against tabby cats. And this happens in lots of different applications that don't involve humans. And when we think about biases can actually enter our system in many different ways. So we're mostly focused on data collection in this particular video. So things like historical biases and representation biases, but also when you define labels in your data, you get measurement bias. When you train and evaluate your model, you can have learning bias. When you deploy your model or send it out to the public, you can get biases. And then there's this feedback loop bias as you iterate through the system. You also introduce biases into the system. So as a developer, you introduce biases into these systems. And as a user, you can even introduce your own biases into these systems, especially when you think about prompting and conditional generation, which we're going to talk about in a future video. Now you might ask the question, but what if I'm using pre-trained generative AI, like large language models? What then? Well, I'm here to tell you that unfortunately, a lot of the data used to train that comes from the internet. And the internet isn't necessarily the least biased place. Think Reddit. Reddit data has been used to train large language models. And there was a paper that came out just this year in 2025 that actually looked at the usage of words in academic abstracts. And so they looked at academic abstracts and looked at specific word use. And if you look at this red line in the plot, this red line here is from December of 2022. Now, does anyone remember what happened in November of 2022? ChatGPT came out. So we see this significant rise in the use of the word significant, additionally, intricate, delve. All of this usage of the word started to increase after ChatGPT. So ChatGPT has its own internal biases around certain words, and we're adapting them as humans in our writing. Some models may have biases integrated in them based on their developers or the organizations that the developers are a part of, things like DeepSeek. So when you ask the question, but what if I'm using pre-trained generative AI, it may actually be worse because you don't control the models or the data, and so you don't have any insights into these biases at all. And when we think about AI models, it's really important to remember the concept of GIGO, which is garbage in, garbage out. And important to recognize that if we put bad data into the model, if we put biased data into the model, if we put data that is inaccurate into the model, then we're going to get inaccurate or biased outputs. So the data is actually really critical towards developing the overarching goals of our AI model. And so when you're thinking about using an AI platform, I want you to think about where did the data come from that was used to train this AI model? Because the data is really important. Thank you for joining me for this episode in the AI for People Who Hate Math series. This is an unscripted series that is inspired by my conversations with people who feel like they can't conceptually understand AI because it's just too much math. And it usually is. Most AI classes, tutorials, and videos are full of math. The AI classes that I teach as a professor have math on nearly every slide. I wanted to challenge this assumption that AI could only be conceptualized by people with strong math backgrounds. Especially as AI permeates our daily lives, I think it's important that everyone understands the technology, at least conceptually. because without it, we're putting a lot of trust into systems we don't understand. Feel free to let me know in the comments if there are topics that you want to see covered. The initial launch is 20 episodes, and I am excited to see what you think.